All right, so it is 5 o'clock and we are going to get started with our Elusive Animals program. But before I get into it, I would recommend downloading the iNaturalist and Seek by iNaturalist apps. I am going to be going through these apps and explaining how you can use them when you're going out and looking for wildlife, and also when you are observing wildlife. So if you'd like to follow along while I do that, I'd recommend downloading them right away. So that you can be ready for that. But moving on. All right, so today I'm going to be your presenter. My name is Scout Kirby, and I am a wildlife educator and AmeriCorps member living in Reno. And today I am going to be talking to you all about the elusive animals we have living in Nevada and some of the adaptations that make them more elusive. So this is going to be the first part of a 4-part program series where I'm going to be talking about these elusive animals. So this first program is going to be more introductory and is going to kind of go over the background information that is going to lead into more species-specific information in the following programs and where you can find those animals in Nevada. But to start us off, just look at this lovely picture of Southern Nevada. So to many Nevadans, this is a really, really beautiful landscape. And we recognize that there are a lot of unique creatures that are found within it. But to many people, even some people that live in Nevada, Nevada is going to look pretty dry and deserted. It doesn't look like it has a whole lot of life, but that is actually not true at all. Nevada is a very diverse state, not only in terms of the organisms that live here, but also in terms of the habitats that we have. And so Nevada is going to be the 7th largest state in the United States. So it's really, really big, and it's been subdivided into 4 ecoregions, which are areas that have distinct natural communities within them and also distinct geography. And so the first ecoregion in Nevada is the smallest. It's the Sierra Nevada ecoregion. So that's in the very far western portion of the state. And that is going to be one of the more resource-rich regions in Nevada. It has a lot more forests and also has a pretty large water source, that being Lake Tahoe. We're also going to have the Great Basin, which is the largest ecoregion in Nevada. And this region is more so in the center of the state. That's where it's concentrated, and it is going to have primarily this kind of desert scrub habitat, along with the majority of it being sagebrush. In the northern portion of the state, we have the Columbia Plateau, which is also known as the Northern Basin and Range. And then in the south, we're going to have the Mojave Desert or Mojave Basin and Range. And that big black dot is just where Las Vegas is supposed to be. So Nevada Department of Wildlife has divided this, the state and these 4 ecoregions into 22 key habitats. And these are habitats that we believe are of the utmost conservation priority because they have both plants and animals that are dependent on them and that wouldn't be in the state without them. And that's going to include habitats like our alpine lakes, as well as a lot of our other water sources and lakes. A lot of the cliffs and canyonlands that are found in the southern portion of the state, as well as grasslands and meadows. And then that really characteristic kind of desert scrub and sagebrush habitat that I said is really found throughout the central portion and also a lot of the northern part of the state as well. And so we have a lot of different habitat diversity, and this is mostly due to the state's topography and also the state's climate. And so in terms of topography, Nevada is known as a basin and range state. That meaning that it has a number of mountain ranges in it, which actually we are considered the most mountainous state in the US, as we have over 300 named mountain ranges. And these mountain ranges are going to be dissected by these really low and pretty arid valleys and basins. And so this is an example. This is a picture I took out at Black Rock Conservation Area. So you can see down in those valleys, it's going to be much more arid. It's going to be a lot drier. And that means that there's going to be a lot fewer resources down there. There's also going to be fewer resources found throughout the state because of how our topography is laid out. The mountain ranges have cut up the state quite a bit and have isolated a lot of the resources. But this is actually good in a way because it has led to much more species diversity in the state. So if you look at this map of biodiversity hotspots in the United States, you can see that that very southern portion of Nevada is actually considered really biodiverse. And so that's the hottest and driest region in Nevada. We actually, as a state, receive less than 10 inches of precipitation every year. So we are the driest state in the US, but especially that lower Mojave region, that's gonna be the driest portion of the state. And it's also going to be the most diverse. So biodiversity is going to refer both to plant and animal species diversity. But you can see throughout the rest of the state, there is quite a bit of diversity as well, especially compared to a lot of the Great Plains and Midwestern states, which have a lot more water. So just because they have more water, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be more diverse. And so all these different kinds of habitats have also allowed for Nevada to have quite a bit of biodiversity, that being their plant and animal species. So we're actually ranked 11th in the US in terms of our total species diversity, so that's plant and animals. And one of the most special things about Nevada is we have a lot of endemic species. So native species are those that are naturally occurring in the state. Endemic species are those that are only going to be found in Nevada. So they're found nowhere else in the US or in the world, which is super, super special. And we have about 173 of these species, including this newly discovered Railroad Valley toad, which was found in 2016, I believe. So that's just kind of a testament to how diverse Nevada is. We have so many different and unique species that we are even now still discovering them. But besides these endemics, we also have a number of native species, and we have quite a variety. We have a bunch of different reptiles and amphibians, as well as birds and mammals. And their distribution in the state is going to reflect the distribution of our resources. So some of our animals are going to be more elusive or harder to find because they are going to be found in areas where there are very limited resources. So two of the most important resources in Nevada are our forests and our water, and they are pretty restricted in the state. So our forests are going to be more so concentrated in the Sierra Nevada region, and then also along that eastern border near White Pine and Lincoln counties. There's also going to be forests found kind of in a central belt in the middle of the state. But as you go towards the center, these forests are going to have less tree species. So if they have less tree species diversity, they're also going to have less animal species diversity because there aren't as many different kinds of resources that come with those different kinds of trees. And then in terms of our water, so the Great Basin Desert is actually only 1% water, and a big portion of Nevada is the Great Basin Desert. So we do not have a lot of water, but we do seem to have quite a bit compared to some other areas. The main issue is that the water is concentrated in the northern half of the state. So there still is a larger water source, Lake Mead, that's going to be down near Las Vegas. And so around these water sources, you're going to find sometimes more diversity because these animals have been separated by mountain ranges and different human developments and all sorts of things that are going to cause them to be adapted to their specific environments in Nevada. Another reason that some of our animals are going to be a little more difficult to find is their population status. So there are about 29 different species in Nevada that are either considered threatened or endangered species. An endangered species would be the Sierra Nevada subspecies of the bighorn sheep. So bighorn sheep are our state mammals, and endangered means that their populations within Nevada are at risk of going extinct within the foreseeable future. We also have threatened animals like this desert tortoise, which is our state reptile. And threatened means that their populations are at risk of becoming endangered within the foreseeable future. So animals like these are going to have reduced populations, and so they're going to be a lot harder to find in the state compared to animals that have very abundant populations. So just looking at this map, you can see from the 1800s compared to now just how much the bighorn sheep's distribution has been reduced in Nevada. So Previously, they were found statewide, and at this point, they're found in really scattered areas throughout the state. And since Nevada is such a large state, it's going to be a lot harder to get out to all those different areas to try to find those bighorn sheep. So moving on to some adaptations that are going to make our animals more elusive. Adaptations are behaviors and traits that make it easier for our animals to survive in their environments. And sometimes these traits are going to make them more elusive. So even though they're helpful for the survival of our animals, they are going to make it difficult for us to go out and observe them. So some behavioral adaptations are going to be habitat preferences. So some animals are going to seek out specific shelters, food sources, water sources, or different habitats, and that's going to make them harder to find, especially since Nevada has more limited resources. Other animals are going to have inconvenient activity patterns for us. So their activity patterns refer to when they are active. They can refer to when they're active throughout the day or also throughout the year. So some animals are going to have varying activity patterns throughout the day or patterns that don't fall within when humans are active. Other animals are going to have periods of inactivity throughout the year, which will make them harder to observe. And then lastly, there's also a number of social relationships that can make our animals more elusive, namely being solitary and territorial. So getting into some of the habitat preferences. So an example of that would be our cave-dwelling bat species in Nevada. They tend to prefer to roost in habitats like mines and caves. Mines are especially dangerous for humans to go and explore. So NDOW will go out and put out these mine gates or these bat gates that will help to keep the bats in and keep the humans out. But doing things like this, even though it protects our wildlife, it can make it harder for us to find them. So then we have to find new areas or seek out different places where we know these animals might be found. Other animals, like our mountain goats, are only going to be found in very specific areas that are quite inaccessible to humans. So they are only found in the Ruby Mountains and then in the eastern part of the Humboldt Range. And they are an alpine species, so they live at very high elevations where humans are normally not going to be up and exploring. And then we also have species like our sagebrush obligates. So these are animals that rely on sagebrush for something in their lives. So whether it's nesting or something that they eat, they need that sagebrush, otherwise they wouldn't be in Nevada. And we have found within the last couple years, especially, that sagebrush has been declining even faster because of invasive species like cheatgrass, as well as human development and other concerns. But as the sagebrush decreases in the state, so are the populations of the animals that rely on it. So things like this sage grouse are going to be a lot harder to find as our sagebrush disappears. So other behavioral adaptations we said are their activity patterns. So on the left side, I have a common porwheel. That is a bird that is primarily active at night, so it is nocturnal. On the right side, I have an American mink, and that is a crepuscular species, meaning they are primarily active at twilight. So being active at night and twilight is going to be inconvenient for humans, as most of us, when we're going out and exploring the outdoors, are going to be doing that during the day. So it's going to be a lot harder to find these animals. Also, some species like American pika, they're going to be inactive during certain parts of the year, that meaning that they're not going to be able to be found because they're going to be hidden away in their rocks, though they do not hibernate. But when they are awake, which is going to be during the summer, they're going to have really short bursts of activity throughout the day. They're not able to thermoregulate very well, so as it gets really warm during the summer, they have to reduce the amount of time they spend outside, and that's going to make them a lot harder to find as well. We also have a number of species that aren't normally found in the state, but will visit from other states. So moose are an example that will sometimes visit from Idaho. But these out-of-state visitors, they tend to have pretty random occurrences in Nevada, and so it's not going to be easy to observe them unless you know where they tend to go in the state or if you're visiting another state. And then that's also going to be the case with a lot of birds. So Nevada is going to lie within the Pacific Flyway, which is a major migration route for West Coast and Western US birds. And a lot of species that are found way up in Alaska and way up north are going to be passing through Nevada while they're migrating south for winter, or while they're migrating north for summer. So they can stop at what we call stopover sites. These are areas that are going to have pretty abundant resources and that are going to be relatively safe for those birds to stop over at. So for example, this is a painted bunting that was observed in March of 2018 in Jean, Nevada. This is a species that has a range that is actually really not that close to Nevada, so it's pretty rare that it was able to fly over this far and someone was able to get a picture of it, though this is not the picture that person was able to take. This is just a different picture where they look really pretty. Other behavioral adaptations that can make our animals elusive include their social relationships. So mountain lions are both solitary and territorial animals. So throughout the year, they're primarily going to be living alone. The males and the females will interact when they are breeding, but otherwise they're going to stay away from each other. And then the females can be found with their mountain lion kittens throughout the year while they're raising them, but otherwise they are going to be solitary. And the males are going to have pretty large home ranges. So home ranges are a general area where that animal is going to stay throughout its life. And so our male mountain lions have a home range of about 115 square miles, which is really, really big. And within that home range, you can find female mountain lions, but you will not find male mountain lions. If another male mountain lion tries to establish a home range that is too close to another, they will become more territorial and start possibly fighting each other if need be. Other animals like this silver-haired bat, this species is going to be solitary, but it is not going to be territorial. So for the majority of the year, silver-haired bats are going to be living on their own, though in the winter they will roost in smaller groups as they hibernate. That's just to give them some more thermal protection from the winter. But the rest of the year, they're going to be pretty much alone. And in their habitats that they live in, they have enough resources that they really don't need to establish a territory and defend it from other bats. So if there are abundant resources in ecosystems, they tend to have fewer territorial species, as there's more than enough to go around. Some physical adaptations that will make our animals more elusive include things like quick reflexes and silence. So this white-tailed jackrabbit on the left, you can tell just from looking at its feet. It has really powerful leg and feet muscles that are going to allow it to actually take 10 to 20-foot leaps in order to escape predators when it feels threatened. So sometimes our animals are just so fast, and also they're able to detect us. So you can see those large ears on that jackrabbit will help it hear you before you can see it. And then by the time you get close, it'll be able to jump away very quickly. So some of our animals are adapted for really quick escapes, and that can make them harder to identify. Other animals, like this northern saw-whet owl on the right, are going to be more silent. So owls are birds that are going to have silent flight, pretty much, meaning that they have wings that have these tiny little serrations along the edges. And these serrations are going to help to muffle the sound as they're flying through the air. And they actually muffle sound more so when the owls fly at a steeper angle, which is generally when they're going down to capture their prey. So that's really important in order for them to complete their hunting, but also it's going to make it harder for us to hear them, as also I've learned that their wings are going to muffle noises, especially frequencies that humans can hear. So they're going to be a lot harder to find, in addition to the fact that they're also nocturnal. Other physical adaptations are going to be well-developed senses. So like I said with that jackrabbit, a lot of elusive animals are elusive because they can get away quickly. And part of the reason for that is that they can detect you before you can detect them. So some animals, like our foxes and a lot of animals related to dogs, are going to have really good senses of smell. They can also have really good sense of hearing, but they also are going to have decent eyesight as well. So this is a desert kit fox that is nocturnal, so it has really, really large ears. It's going to have a great sense of hearing. It has that elongated snout, so you know it's going to have a good sense of smell. And then it's also going to have decent eyesight as it is a nocturnal species, so it's going to be out at nighttime. Other animals, like those related to cats, so like our mountain lions, are going to have excellent hearing in addition to really, really good vision. So their eyes are one of the largest features on their faces, which should tell you that they rely heavily on their sense of sight, and they have really, really accurate vision. Though mountain lions and other cats, as well as dogs, are also going to have whiskers, which are going to also help with detecting changes in the environment, but that is technically through their sense of touch. And then a little bit similarly, we have reptiles that are going to be able to use their sense of touch in different ways to detect vibrations in the ground. And they're also going to be using their tongues as a way to smell. And so I'm going to kind of get into that more so in the upcoming webinars, where I'll be going more in depth about different reptile species and their adaptations. So some more physical adaptations. It's really important to be small and camouflaged if you're going to be elusive. So small size is really important in staying inconspicuous. So a lot of the animals in Nevada are some of the smallest species in the US. So for example, spotted skunks are one of the smallest skunk species in the US, though I believe the pygmy skunk is the smallest. The sidewinder rattlesnake is also the smallest rattlesnake in Nevada. And then we have another of other small animals as well. And this is partially because of the lack of resources or the smaller concentrations of resources that we have in the state. So these smaller animals tend to live in harsher environments where there is not as much resource or habitat for them to get really large and big. And so a lot of these animals are going to remain small, and that's also going to help them with thermal regulation, as well as avoiding predators and things like that too. And camouflage is one of the better known physical adaptations that's going to make an animal more elusive, but there's actually 4 different kinds of camouflage. So the first is concealing coloration, which is kind of the best known one. So it's just animals being colored to blend into their background. So this pygmy rabbit, you can see, has some brown, some gray, some whites, a little bit more darker colors as well. And that's going to help it to blend in with the underbrush and its sagebrush environment. Whereas other animals might have something more like disruptive coloration. So this is generally patterning that are found in animals, so things like stripes and spots. And those are used to break up the silhouette of an animal so that they don't stand out as much in their environment. So especially for predators like the peregrine falcon, that's going to be really helpful when you're soaring from above and coming down to catch prey, so that the prey can't look up and see you and then run away. There's also going to be a form of camouflage called method disguise, and this is when our animals are going to resemble common objects in their environments. So this is a western pond turtle, and you can really see its method disguise when it's laying out on logs or basking on rocks. And that's because that hard outer shell, as well as the coloration of the shell, help it blend in with those natural objects in its environment and allow it to go more unnoticed. So then our last kind of camouflage is a little bit confusing in that you're not necessarily trying to blend in with your environment, but you're trying to blend in with something dangerous within your environment. So on the left side, I have a Sonoran king snake that is a non-venomous snake in Nevada. And on the right side, that is the venomous coral snake, which I believe barely gets its range into Nevada. But their ranges do overlap, and over time, the Sonoran king snake has evolved to where it is going to have a very similar coloration to the venomous coral snake, and that is a way for it to hide out in its environment so that predators are not going to bother it, which in the case of humans, we probably would then not bother it either. So that can make them more inconspicuous in that we might mistake them for other animals, or we just might avoid them in general. So why is it important for our animals to be elusive? Well, like we said before, adaptations are traits and behaviors that are going to help an animal to survive in its environment. So right here, I have a picture of the state fossil, the ichthyosaur. This is an extinct species in Nevada. And this is what our animals are trying to avoid. They do not want to go extinct. They want to keep their populations going for as long as possible. And so they're going to have all these different adaptations to help them survive in their environments. And these adaptations just so happen to make them harder for us to go out and observe them. And so it's really helpful for animals like ringtails and western banded geckos to be nocturnal or crepuscular, not only to avoid humans, but also to avoid the heat of the day, as well as increased competition, as there tends to be more predators out during the day. Animals like snow geese, it's really important that they only stop over in Nevada when they're migrating, because that's when there's going to be the most resources for them in the state. Otherwise, there's not going to be much for them in a really dry and arid state. Other animals like our rubber boas on the right, that's a snake species that is going to become inactive when it gets too hot, and also inactive when it gets too cold. And so these are going to be really helpful in order for the animal to maintain its body temperature, or also just keep itself safe throughout the winter and the hottest months. But it's also going to make it harder for us to find them, since they're not going to be active for certain periods of time. And then other animals, like we said, will seek out specific habitats. So that means that they have likely been in those habitats for thousands of years and have been adapted to them. So a lot of them are going to have specific diet preferences. They may have specific shelter preferences, or maybe they even need a specific kind of water source. And so these animals are going to be harder to find in the state because some of our habitats are harder to find. So depending on the species, it's going to be harder to find them, but it's beneficial that they remain in these habitats that they have evolved in. And then lastly, that camouflage is also going to be important, not only for avoiding humans, but also to avoid predators and to avoid detection from your prey. So this horny toad on the left is pretty well camouflaged, both from predators as well as its prey. So it's going to be going after little ants that it's going to be eating. And on the right side, we have a short-tailed weasel, or a stoat, which actually is going to change colors throughout the year in order to make it easier to survive. So during the summer months, it's going to have this type of fur patterning where it's going to be darker on top and lighter on the bottom. But in the winter, it's actually going to have an entirely white coat, except for their tail, it'll still remain black. And that's so that it can help them blend in during the winter, not only when they're hunting, but also so that predators like hawks and other things aren't able to see them and eat them. So my main conclusion that I want you to come away with from this introductory program is that Nevada has quite a bit of diversity, but it's going to be a lot harder to observe, especially compared to other states in the United States. And so now the second half of this program, I am going to be focusing on how you can go out and find different species in Nevada, and not necessarily even the elusive ones, but a couple different resources that may help with that as well. So my first viewing tip for if you're going out and looking for wildlife is to minimize your presence as much as possible. So this can be done using a number of different types of equipment, so things like scopes and binoculars. You can also go out and just buy natural colored clothing or even camouflaged clothing, but also doing things like not wearing perfume when you're going out. Certain things like that are going to minimize your presence. A lot of people in Nevada are going to live in more urban areas, and these are really unnatural settings for our wild animals, or for most of our wild animals. And so these urban settings are going to be really smelly, and they have a lot of light, and they're pretty loud. And so a lot of that tends to come with us when we go out into nature. And so one of the best things you can do is avoid bringing your best friend, which is an unnatural predator. So dogs and cars and other things that are going to be loud and scary to wild animals aren't going to be helpful when you're going out and trying to find these animals, especially the more elusive ones. Another tip I have is to do your research. So if you are looking, either for a specific species or you're just traveling to a new region and you want to learn about what species are there, you can utilize a number of different resources, both online and in print. So online, you can go to different websites. The Nevada Department of Wildlife has a page on their website dedicated to the brochures that they put out. So they have a lot of information on bat species, bird species, all different kinds of species in the state, as well as information on the wildlife management areas that we help maintain. And these tend to be in areas that have a lot of species and diversity. So it's good to go visit those, and they're less frequently visited too. But you can also look for written resources, so things like field guides and ID books. Those can be helpful when you're looking at specific species, but also if you just want to learn more about their habitat preferences and other things like that. Another tip I have is to pay really, really close attention. So one of the main reasons why people don't find animals when they're going out and looking for them is that they just aren't paying close enough attention. So make sure you're being very quiet. This is not only to help conceal yourself, but it also is going to make it easy for you to detect other signs. So for example, some people can identify birds just from their songs, which is going to be a really helpful tool if you're not able to actually see that bird itself. So making sure that you're both looking around, but also using your other senses, and even looking for indirect evidence can be really helpful. So you can look for things like tracks, as well as scat or feather or bones, as well as evidence of shelter, so things like burrows and nests. All these different things can help you to find different animals and identify them. Another important thing to take into account when you're going out and viewing wildlife is human error. So I am one of those people that is guilty of going out and looking for birds, and I'll see something that I think is a really, really cool species, and then it turns out it's a pretty common one. But it also happens in the reverse, where sometimes people go out and they'll see a species they think is a common one, but it actually is a little bit more rare. So on the left side, I have an adult red-tailed hawk. That is the most common hawk in North America. And you can tell that it is a red-tailed hawk because of that red tail. And on the right side, there is a similar looking bird, but this is actually a juvenile bald eagle. So they look really, really similar to both the adult and the juvenile red-tailed hawks. But there are a number of field signs that you can look for that can help you to identify them. So one of the main reasons why they look so similar is because they don't have that golden beak or that bald white head that the adults are going to have. But if you look at other signs, you can differentiate them. So red-tailed hawks are going to have more of this white coloring on their chest, and they're going to have a lot more brown speckles in the form of a band on their belly. Whereas juvenile bald eagles are going to have a darker chest, and then they're going to have a lighter belly with a little bit of brown spotting. So one of the resources that I think is super helpful, not only in taking into account human error, but also just with helping with identification, is the iNaturalist app. So at the beginning of the program, I had up a page that had a screenshot of the iNaturalist app in the App Store, as well as Seek by iNaturalist. So if you did end up downloading those, I would open them now, as I'm going to start getting into explaining how you can use them both to explore the area and its species, and also to help you identify and observe species. So what is iNaturalist? iNaturalist is a citizen science app. So citizen science means that everyday people are going in and submitting observations that are then being verified by other naturalists and scientists and logged into this scientific database. So the main kind of procedure is that you would go out, look for wildlife, and if you find something, you would take a picture of it, upload it to the app, where there are a bunch of other people that can look at your observation and tell you what type of animal you were looking at. And sometimes they can get even more specific about different types of details depending on where you are. Once you have uploaded an observation, it's going to be logged into the iNaturalist system, and then it's going to be available for all other naturalists to view. So if you go to iNaturalist, you can see all these different maps of thousands of species found worldwide. If you go specifically to Nevada, I looked up the gopher snakes iNaturalist observations in the state, and you can see they are found throughout the state, and there is quite a bit of them in Nevada. But this app is super, super helpful, especially since it has over 38 million observations worldwide, though you can see that North America has quite a high concentration of those. And then there's also over 1 million people that are using that app that can help you to identify whatever you're looking for. So sometimes I think one of the best resources when you're trying to figure out what an animal is just other human beings and using their knowledge. So now getting into how you can explore iNaturalist and the observations that have been submitted there. Once you log in, you'll be taken to a homepage like this. So this is my homepage. And if you wanted to go and just explore the region, you could go down to this little explore button and click on that. So that's going to take you to a map where it's going to automatically have your location. So I'm in the northern part of Reno, and it's showing me all these different observations that have been submitted around me. And the different colors are going to refer to different kinds of organisms. So green is going to refer to plants. Blue is going to refer to vertebrates or anything with the backbone. So that includes mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and also birds. Red is going to be invertebrates, so things like arachnids and arthropods. And then pink is going to be fungi, which also includes lichens. The last three categories, I think the only people that use those are researchers, so you can just ignore those. Odds are you're not going to be uploading pictures of protozoans. But if you want to get a better view of all these observations in your area, you can click on this little 9 square menu that's up there in the middle. And that'll take you to this kind of display screen that's going to show you all the observations, and it's going to have the picture that goes with it. And you can actually click on the observation. So I'm going to click on this Great Basin rattlesnake observation. And it's going to tell me exactly where that observation occurred. So at Total Recall Trail near Hodge Road Trailhead in Reno. And it's also going to have pictures that the observer uploaded. So if you just uploaded one picture, it'll just have the one, but you can actually upload multiple, and that can actually make it easier for other naturalists to help you identify a species if you're unsure. And then at the bottom, you can also see the quality of that observation. So once enough people have verified the identification of that species, it's going to get up higher in its grade until it reaches a research grade, meaning that that is a very high quality observation. That species was definitely found in that location or area. So now if you want to actually go out and submit iNaturalist observations, you can do that as well. So how you're going to do that is you're going to go down to this camera button in the very middle at the bottom. And by clicking on that, it's going to take you to whatever your camera is facing. So for iNaturalist, I like to take pictures on my camera app on my phone and then upload them to the app. But you can take a live picture just like this, just by clicking this green button in the middle. If you click the photographs on the right side, that'll let you pick a picture out of your photo library from your phone. So let's pretend that I picked this picture of this bird that I took at Oxbow Nature Study Area. As soon as I clicked that picture, I didn't even need to upload any of this information. So it automatically was uploaded to iNaturalist, the location, as well as the date and time of that observation. But once you have filled this out, the only times that I've had to fill it out myself is if I took the picture in an area where there wasn't any service. So sometimes that can be annoying if you're uploading your observations. You need to make sure you mark where you saw that animal. But once you have uploaded that information, or once you've put it in yourself, you can then click on the "What did you see" box right here, and iNaturalist will give you suggestions based on its own recognition software of the animal it thinks you might have been seeing. So the more observations that are uploaded to iNaturalist, the better its recognition software gets. So that's also a good reason to get out there and start uploading pictures, because it makes it a lot easier for other users then, in addition to you. But once you click on the what species is it box, iNaturalist is going to give you some suggestions. So depending on the quality of your picture, they might suggest it to species. They might only be able to suggest it to genus or family though. So for this picture that I took, iNaturalist was only able to identify it to its genus being in the flickers. I know, because I have identified these before, that this is a northern flicker. But if I didn't know, I could scroll down and see all these options that iNaturalist gives me, and it's going to tell me not only if the species looks similar, but also if it has been recorded in a nearby location. So that can be helpful with knowing what type of animal or what type of species you're looking for. And if I wanted to have more information on the northern flicker, I could click on this little eye information icon, and that's going to take me to this page. So it gives me some general information about northern flickers. It gives me a huge map of all the observations that have ever been logged in iNaturalist of the northern flicker. So in my opinion, this information page isn't super user-friendly, and it's not the most helpful. So I'm going to be next talking about the Seek app, which is also through iNaturalist. So if this app is too confusing, I would recommend using the Seek app instead, and I'll be getting into that soon. But once you have figured out your species, it'll take you back to this page. So I clicked on northern flicker, and now I can just go down to the bottom and click the share button, and it'll send it out into the iNaturalist universe. So then you can see on the side here these little communication bubbles. Those are going to tell you that other naturalists have been looking at your posts and have been commenting on them. So if they're red, that means they're unopened. Mine are all black because I've already opened them. But if you were to click on them, sometimes people will just agree with the species or family or genus identification that you made. Other times they may correct you, which has happened a number of times to me. That's why this app is super helpful though, because then you're not going around telling people you saw one thing when you actually saw another. But now we're going to get into the Seek app, because I think this is a little more user-friendly, and especially if you're going out and viewing wildlife with kids, I think this app is going to be a lot easier to navigate. So this is a screenshot of Seek in the App Store. Like iNaturalist, you can kind of look through and see the information about it, but it's the same type of deal. It's a citizen science app. That is a joint project between the California Academy of Sciences and National Geographic Society. And it is kind of, it's not necessarily partnered with iNaturalist, but it's basically like a baby app version of iNaturalist. And so one of the reasons why I think Seek is so helpful is that it's going to have a lot more information on it than the iNaturalist app. So when we clicked on that little information icon on the northern flicker, it said at the bottom you could click to get more info, but you have to go to iNaturalist.org. The Seek app is a little bit more helpful in that it's going to have some more of the information that would be found on the .org website, and it's going to be in the Seek app rather than you having to leave the app and go to the website in order to find that information. So Seek, because it is an app that goes along with iNaturalist, you can actually log into Seek through your iNaturalist account. If you don't want to do that though, you can just create a Seek account and not use iNaturalist at all. But you can actually, iNaturalist is going to send all of its observations to Seek. So if you're using the Seek app, you can still see all the iNaturalist observations that have been submitted to the iNaturalist app as well. So once you sign in, it will take you to a home page like this, and it's going to show your current location. So I'm in Reno, and it's going to automatically produce a list of all the species that are in your area. So I am in the northern part of Reno, and these are some of the plants. And if you were to scroll to the right, you could see some of the other plants and animals that are found in my region. If I didn't want to stay in the Reno region though, you can click on this button and it'll take you to a map, so similar to iNaturalist, but it will not show you those little flags of observations until you click this search near location area. So I don't want to look in Reno anymore. Let's pretend that I'm going on a trip to Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge, which is near Fallon, Nevada. So I moved my little clicker over here, and now I'm going to hit this search near location button at the bottom. And now this has taken me to my home page, but now the location is set at Fallon, so where I put my little marker. And it again is going to be showing me all of the species that have been observed near where I put my marker. If you want, you can go in and look at specific groups of animals. So you can scroll through and see, you can click on insects or reptiles. For this example, I'm going to click on mammals. And then I'm going to go over to the right to the American badger, because that's a species that I've always wanted to see. I've yet to see it besides roadkill, so I would really like to see a live one. So this is really useful, the Seek app, in that I can then click on the American badger and it'll give me more information about that species, which can be helpful in informing decisions on where you're going to look for them in the state of Nevada. So one, it's going to tell me that it's a native species, which is good information to have because I don't necessarily like to seek out invasive species as much. It's also going to give you other information, so like a little blurb about type information that's from Wikipedia. That is the same information I believe that they have on iNaturalist app. They're going to have that range map, which you can zoom in and see all the different observations of American badgers in Nevada. So you can see they're more so kind of in the center of the state right here. But they also are going to have a little bit more information, like the seasonality of observations. So when these observations occurred during the year. So you can see that the majority occurred in June. And so if I was going to go out and try to find a badger at Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge, it would be my best bet to probably go in June or July. And then likely I would go find that specific observation on the map and go somewhere near that location. But you can also submit your observations through Seek, and that way it can be helpful for people like me that want to go out and find these different species but don't necessarily know where to go. So you can, like iNaturalist, go down to the bottom and click that little camera emoticon type deal. And that'll take you again to just whatever your camera is facing. So in my house, I have a little pineapple plant that I had my camera on. And as you can see, before I even took the picture, Seek was able to tell me that it was a pineapple plant, so it identified it to the species. And these little dots right here are going to tell you how confident it is. So it has all dots fully colored and green, meaning that it is very confident in that identification. But like iNaturalist, you can also go down and just upload photos from your photo library, which is what I'm going to do. And so this is a flower that I took a picture of while I was out hiking. And since I don't know what it is, I'm going to try to use Seek to identify it. So after I pick that photo, I'm just going to click Identify Photo. And Seek is going to give me its best guess. So based on the recognition software it has, it recommends that the identification of common star lily for this flower that I found. And so if I wanted to look into that more specific species information, I can click on the View Species button. Otherwise, you can scroll down, and if you have an iNaturalist account, you can post that observation to iNaturalist as well. So that way it'll be logged both into the Seek app as well as the iNaturalist app. Now, if you do not have a phone or do not like using your phone, or you just want access to all of that information that is available on the website, I've included the link right here. And this is a link that is specific to Nevada. So iNaturalist, if you just go to iNaturalist.org, you can look up throughout the world where different observations are. You can also look up specific regions. So if you just Google Nevada iNaturalist, it should come up with this state checklist where you can then go through and look at all the different kinds of animals. Oops. All right, so my last wildlife viewing tip, which is more so of a rule, is going to be respect. So it's extremely important that we are being respectful when we're going out and viewing wildlife because our animals need to remain wild. So we need to make sure we are not disturbing them, we're not feeding them, Make sure you're trying to leave no trace as best as possible. So don't be leaving any trash behind or any unnatural things that wouldn't normally be found in that area. And especially don't feed wildlife. That's one of the biggest things that we tell people not to do, as it will habituate animals, making them less afraid of humans, which is unsafe for humans as well as our animals. So please make sure you're being respectful of the animals as well as property. Nevada has quite a bit of public lands, so that's a lot of different areas to go out and view wildlife legally. So make sure if you are going out, research whatever region you're going to so you are not trespassing, and make sure you're being respectful of other people's property. All right, so this is the very end of this program, which, like I said, I am going to be doing 3 more elusive programs that are going to highlight specific species and go more into depth into what kind of adaptations they have and how those adaptations influence their elusiveness. So my next one is going to be Friday, June 5th at 5 p.m. And I believe the ones after that are also going to be on Fridays as well. But in the meantime, Nevada has a number of really exciting webinars that we're putting out for everybody. And so I'm just gonna keep this page up as we finish. That way everyone can get a good look of the upcoming webinars. And if you go to the Nevada Department of Wildlife's Facebook, you can then go in and sign up for these webinars. All right, so at this point, I just want to thank you all for attending this webinar. And now I will open it up to any questions that there may be.
So currently, we do not have any open questions, but I think we'll give it another maybe 2 minutes and see if any pop up.
Perfect. And then if anyone has additional questions about using iNaturalist or using Seek again, if you're planning on watching the second program, I am going to go over how to use those again in regards to just looking up species and seeing where they have been observed in the state.
Someone says, if I only want one app, which should I choose?
So it is kind of based on your comfort level, I would say. iNaturalist, I think, is a little more complicated, and it can be overwhelming if you're not more familiar with wildlife identification. So if you are comfortable with identifying species in general, I would say use more so iNaturalist. But if you're not comfortable with species identification, or if you're just going out and like taking pictures of like flowers that you see on your walk because you want to know what they are, I would recommend using Seek. And especially if you're going out and using it with kids, I would recommend Seek rather than iNaturalist. That's another good point, is that iNaturalist can actually, in addition to uploading pictures of an animal, you can also upload pictures of scat and tracks, and different naturalists and scientists can help you identify those as well. So I've actually uploaded different examples of like bear scat that I found at Oxbow Nature Study Area, and had people tell me that, yes, indeed, we do have black bears in the middle of downtown Reno.
So someone says that they saw a hawk. I'm assuming it was the peregrine hawk that might have been seen at Oxbow a couple of weeks ago, or
Yes.
months ago.
Yeah, and so
I'm wondering if they come into urban areas.
They definitely will. So peregrine falcons, they're a smaller species, and they also are going to be eating small mammals, which are found in a lot of urban areas. So they definitely can be found in urban areas, especially ones that have high enough perches that they can swoop down and catch their prey, as that's the way they like to go about hunting.
Yes, peregrine falcons are actually flocking to New York City because they love all the high rises. All right, and I don't think we have any more questions at this point.
All right. Well, as we kind of wrap this up, I just want to once again say thank you to everyone that was attending. Any awesome feedback that you gave me. There will be a survey at the end of this program that will ask you to fill out. And if you wouldn't mind filling it out and giving me any pointers, I would super appreciate it. I want to make sure I do the best job possible, especially since this is a series. So any tips you have for the upcoming programs would be greatly appreciated. But also just thank you for showing up and hanging out with us.